Everest is different. It's financially different. It's time different. We're trying to build a system so that every client who has the physical and mental ability to make a summit push gets an opportunity to have that summit push. That's the mindset we bring into Everest, is like, no matter how bad it goes, how can we still give people, if we can safely, an opportunity to summit this mountain that they've poured years of their lives into? That takes massive infrastructure and planning. Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Keykeper. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
Welcome back to episode 24 of the Duffel Shuffle Podcast. Adrian, you're back home, it looks like.
I'm back home. Absolutely. Yeah, we got back from Switzerland almost a week ago. So I can't use jet lag as an excuse for my brain moving slowly anymore, or for like afternoon naps or hot tub sessions when I should be working or training. And it's great to be home. I think I said this to you before we turned on. No one would call this season in Tahoe epic by Tahoe standards, but it sure is fun. Like kind of shifting back from big mountain terrain in Switzerland, having to think pretty hard every day, to, since I've been here, I've skied like amazing corn laps in a t-shirt with like more dogs than people on the slope, and, you know, true low avalanche conditions. I carry an airbag and a helmet almost all the time. And it was like, I don't need an airbag today. Like, you know, so that was a great way to come home. And then we just rolled into this funny little refresh today that I'm guessing you didn't ski. You know, I think we got an inch at my house and maybe 4 inches up on the mountain. But I will tell you, that 4 inches skied smooth and fast. I just had so much fun. So home is good.
Yeah, I just watched a video of Travis Ganon, a friend of ours, posted, and without sound, it looked epic. With sound, you know, make sure you do your due diligence on what Instagram shows you. But
Okay.
no,
Noted.
it's
When
nice.
I put my reel up today, I will make sure that it has music, not live sound.
A little scratchy, it looks like, but yeah, no, it's a beautiful time in Tahoe. I mean, it was quite the juxtaposition. Saturday was warm and sunny, and people weren't even thinking about skiing. I saw people taking dips in the lake, and then you know, Sunday yesterday was pretty stormy and cold, and got a little bit of snow.
Yep, 100%. I mean, I guess it's because we live here, but I just like embrace this and love it so much that we do have those 70-degree days that you can go. I saw so many friends going mountain biking this past weekend, and you know, I saw lots of people out rock climbing, like on Donner Summit and going to the crags that face the sun kind of thing. I've said it so many times. There's always so much to do here. It's just we do have to be a little bit flexible with what we get given, and I think there's no denying that it does just feel warmer this year to me, and 1 year does not a trend make. But certainly, like when I'm looking at it, I'm like, wow, it's not that we've had so much less precip, I think, than an average year, but it's been warm. And so at my house, like I just put out all my summer's patio furniture. I'm like, there has never been enough snow on my south facing deck not to have patio furniture. So why am I not lounging on an awesome like couch instead of like standing?
Yep, it's that time of year. You got to start thinking about spring coming and change of seasons.
Now, you just got back from Jackson, right?
Yeah, I've been in Jackson for the past 10 days or so. Got back on Saturday, teaching up there. You know, another place where I've been going to Jackson this exact week for the last 5 years in a row. And normally it's cold. It is bitterly cold in Jackson in the Tetons this time of year. And we often go up to Togety Pass, which is even colder right on the Continental Divide. And this year it was warm. We got a little bit of fresh snow, but I left Jackson on Friday and Teton Pass was like a river of water running down the road, just the rapid melt that they see. So it was a little bit of a interesting experience, you know, as compared to what I've known in the past, but it's a beautiful time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. I went surfing this week. How does that fit in?
I don't know. That's a unique opportunity that you have.
Well, like, it was my birthday, right? And like normally I ski and eat cheese in Switzerland for my birthday. Well, instead that's what I've been doing for the last 3.5 weeks. And we happened to come home to Tahoe on the day before my birthday. And the skiing was definitely not going to be epic. I didn't want to go like climbing in the gym. I wanted to have a memorable day. And not that I needed a swell, but it happened that there was this big north swell hitting the coast. Like the places we usually go and surf, like Pleasure Point on Santa Cruz, was saying it was going to be like 8 to 10 feet and stuff like that. So I was like, this is a swell, let's go. And then we had to surf at like the most baby protected spot in all of Northern California. And we had so much fun.
Oh,
So
that's awesome. That is great.
I don't
Yeah,
know how that
surfing.
fit in, but
It fits in.
all
I mean,
about living in
why we choose to
California.
live here is all the opportunities that we are positioned to be around.
That's right.
You can be skiing, mountain biking, surfing all in the same weekend.
Hell yeah. Life is good.
Awesome. Well, for those of you that don't listen to our podcast regularly, normally we dive into some news. There's not a whole ton of current events. Actually, that's a total lie. There's a ton of current events and news going on, but relative to the outdoor industry, not a whole ton. We had a tough week of some avalanche deaths in the end of February. Conditions have seemed to stabilize quite a bit, which is great to hear, especially with more snow coming. The Department of Government Efficiency is wreaking havoc on the national parks and National Forest Service staffing. But at the same time, I've heard that Denali National Park has hired their seasonal rangers. I've heard that Yellowstone National Park had approval to hire all their seasonal workforce. So as I mentioned last time, we kind of got to just wait and see. Any other news you've got that's crossed your desk?
I mean, so much and so little is kind of how I was feeling about it as we were going in. I mean, first of all, great catch that there is so much news going on in the world. So we don't want to sound completely out of touch in our little white A-frame bubbles that we're both sitting in right now. That there's so much news, so much challenge out there in the world. I was just like, life is good. You were like, there's no news. Obviously, things are really challenging for a lot of people out there. I think we are like trying to roll with it, right? And then take a little bit of a wait and see approach in the big picture and also speak to the current events that really matter to us, which is what we did last news cycle or last news section. And then, like you said, yeah, you mentioned a couple of kind of outdoor industry news. I saw so many things kind of pop up in the past couple of weeks. Maybe we call them inside baseball, whether it's, like Real Rock, which is kind of like the main film festival of our industry, at least on the rock climbing side. They just launched their films and there was like some drama in one of them about characters and old history of one of the characters. And there was another thing that popped up that maybe a film that was in last year's Real Rock didn't honestly tell the story of a climb in Peru because it cut a character out that was actually there. And it kind of reminded me that, of that feeling that like things can feel so important when we're in them and they're our world and we know the characters or we've read about the characters for years and years and years. And then big picture, it's like, well, everyone's probably going to be all right, right? We're making media, we're creating entertainment. Hopefully people are inspired by things like Real Rock and this podcast. And hopefully people are still going outside and sliding on snow and crawling up rocks. And
Absolutely.
and that's good enough for me.
Yep, I agree. I think it's a realization that the news going on in the world right now kind of dwarfs what's going on in the outdoor industry. So I like
And the
that as a summary.
last thing on that, though, like, yes, it dwarfs it. And at the same time, like, I just know I love news. Like, I listen to news podcasts. I read Axios. I read the New York Times. I listen to NPR. I listen to the Daily. Like, I can definitely get sucked into too much news. And M is like, what the fuck? Like, and the key balance for me is I go outside. And like, I've really shifted. I think we might have talked about this at some point. I used to listen to podcasts while I'm training outside. And now I'm really either listening to music or nothing at all because I noticed that I was like losing that reset that outside was actually providing me. So that's my personal cautionary tale. But like, I guess the message is like, go outside. And I know we're really lucky in what our outside looks like and how quiet and beautiful and pristine it is, but there's outside everywhere. And I truly believe it can provide some perspective.
I like that. That's awesome. Well, on that note, we kind of want to talk about what you're doing lately inside. Everest season is upon us, and there's a lot of prep that goes into Everest. So coming up on this episode, we're going to dive into kind of the behind the scenes of Everest prep and what that looks like to get an expedition off the ground.
Let's do it.
Welcome back. This is episode 24 of the Duffel Shuffle Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about Everest. Shocker, once again, that big old mountain.
Steve, that's what me and Emily called it for years. And actually, right now, maybe this is a good place to start this. Like right now, we're so in it. It's all Everest all the time. And Em is so over it. I think we might be getting back to calling it Steve relatively soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good lead in. It consumes a lot of your time, and I think it consumes a lot of your time year round, but especially in these months leading up to Everest, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see. People through the media, through, maybe their expedition operator, even friends of yours don't see kind of all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And so we just wanted to kind of highlight that a little bit and kind of understand the process of preparing for an Everest expedition and what it looks like. So, personally, how many years have you been leading Everest expeditions, and how much of your time in a year do you think Everest consumes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this will be, I think, my 14th year going to Everest in the spring. So that's 14 of the last, whatever it is, 18, because the COVID years I took off. I went on vacation for a few years during COVID, thanks to the Chinese regulations. But so this all started for me in 2008, and I've been going every year except for COVID years since. And in those initial years from 2008 to 2012, it was Himalayan Experiences Expedition, really, run by Russell Bryce, and Alpenglow Expeditions was partnering with this legend of the business. And so those trips I started like 2008. I didn't even think about Everest until a week before. 2009, I thought about it a month before or 2 months before. I mean, not counting training. Training is separate. But, by 2010, I was pretty involved in the logistics with Russ, kind of taking over some big parts of it. So it was starting to be more time, 11 more time. 12, we decided that we had different visions for the mountains and split. And then ever since then, Everest has been kind of, in many ways, all encompassing. Maybe the best way to think about it is like Russell's business was a very successful Everest business, one of the first. And the only trips he ran were Cho Oyu in the autumn, the sixth tallest mountain in the world. And the only purpose of that trip was to train people to be ready for Everest in the spring. So we ran 2 trips a year, and it was way more than a full-time job for him and 1 assistant in the office, essentially. So 2 people in the office, plus, he was running the trips themselves. And, once we were doing it through Alpenglow, it's hard to say. I just feel like I've always had like multiple full-time jobs, but Everest probably, took up somewhere between 40 and 60% of my time in any year.
And is there any part of the year, any month of the year that you don't think about Everest in terms of what you have to do on the business side at all?
Totally. It's such a great question. I mean, yeah, it's probably like M's favorite month. It's like every year we leave Tahoe for the entire month of July and go on the road and just rock climb. Like that's all we do out of our van, usually, occasionally internationally. But I think that's a great example. The way we've done that for a decade now, and the way that I think that formed was that is the 1 month where there's essentially nothing. Even when back in the day when I was running this business myself, and a client would be like, I'm interested in going to Everest. If it was in July, they got an auto response. It was like, I'll get back to you. Yeah. So, the trip ended by the end of May. June is all clean up, going through hundreds of receipts and bills and accounting and trying to figure out did we get ripped off? Are we being fairly treated by all of our providers all over the world to make this trip possible? And at the end of the day, did we break even, or did I essentially pay people to go and climb Mount Everest, which is what happened some years? So that's all of June at least. And then by the time we're into August, we're like seriously getting into, okay, who's our team for next year? How many people are they ready? What training do they need? What other peaks do they need to go to in advance? So like it really feels like it ramps back up by the end of summer.
Yeah, so let's kind of start there. The first big factor in planning an Everest expedition is, what does the team look like? What sort of bookings do you have from a client standpoint? Obviously, there's group bookings and there's private bookings, and a private could be 1-to-1 or it could be 2 clients and 1 guide. And then the group is a maximum of 4 clients on a team with 1 mountain guide and Sherpas as well. When do you start taking bookings? Will you take a booking for 2028 right now? And what's kind of the cutoff? Like, when is truly the last possible day that you could sign up for an Everest expedition?
I would probably not take a booking for 2028 right now to answer that question. We have a lot of people hoping to climb Everest in 2028, 2029, 2027. We haven't taken their deposits for those trips, but we're taking their deposits on other trips leading to that big one. But it's a little, if you're 3 years out, it's almost always because you have to build skills. It's a little hard to guarantee that that person's passion and life and health and family and all these things are going to line up. So we would rather take it step by step, even though the goal is very, very clear. But people certainly book over a year out. So we have bookings for 2026 now. And that's a great thing that, maybe has changed from back when I was like running this all by myself and told people to wait until August. It's like now we can take people seriously in January and be like, of course, 2026 is a great goal. Having a year to prepare as a client, even, assuming you have the experience you need on most of it, a year is a great amount of time to be able to put focused training in, to be able to do at least one brush up style expedition to South America or the Alps or somewhere to make sure skills are kind of like up and ready to go, to take advantage of all the gear discounts that happen in these different seasons. The funny thing is it can be really difficult to outfit for Everest because a lot of the cold weather gear you need, you can't get in the summer and fall. So like a great time to get discounted gear for next year's Everest is this spring at the end of winter kind of thing. And so a year is fantastic. Of course, many people come to us with less time than that, especially over the past couple of years as people have had uncertain confidence in China opening Tibet, since we only run trips from China, only in Tibet. That's a necessary limitation, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But so if people have wanted to wait and book later, the latest we accepted bookings this year, I believe, was we told everyone it was the end of the year, so kind of December 31st, and we accepted the last couple of people in the first few days of January. That gave us time to meet the submission deadline of China at the end of January. So we wanted all the paperwork, and bookings are closed. So for us, Alpenglow, and for anyone operating on the north side of the mountain, there is just no way you can join the team after, middle of January for a mid-April expedition. But there is a caveat to that, which is Nepal, where anything goes in Nepal. Like that's one of the challenges for me, that I feel like it's not being, managed very thoughtfully. But one of the beauties is you, Sam Kiekefer, could decide middle of the season, May 10th. Wow, it looks like a great season. Weather's awesome. I want to go. And you could book onto a team. There would be a local logistics operator that would take you, and you could just show up, and they'd take someone's oxygen that they'd left the team, or maybe they had some extra oxygen for emergencies, and they'd cobble it together and be like, off you go. I don't recommend that way of approaching the mountain, but it is possible.
Well, and I think that scenario of like, I'm deciding now is unlikely, but certainly last season when China delayed the entry date, there were teams that were able to pivot to the south side of the mountain and allowed them to continue their expedition as planned, just on the opposite route. So maybe a little bit more realistic scenario.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, we even, little known fact, we had a member of our team denied a visa last year in a super last minute fashion due to politics. They were a non-American, and politics that we don't understand and don't really have insight into. And that member was able to still switch. They'd done all their pre-acclimatization, all their training, everything. I think they switched when we just had exhausted every possibility we had to try to help this visa process happen. I think they switched on something like May 10th to a Southside expedition. So we were able to find an operator that we liked, that we respect, that we were able to recommend to this poor person who had like worked so hard for this expedition and just didn't want to wait a year. And we were able to just pass as much money over as we possibly could, minus the cost we had lost in China. And they were able to switch like international flights and land and ended up summiting. And so that is like, you're right, that is a more realistic situation. And it is, in some ways, it's great that that possibility exists.
Absolutely. And so bookings obviously are a factor in the deadline to submit to the CTMA, which we'll dive into a little bit more in a minute, is a factor. When is the earliest that you really start planning the logistics, and how does that line up with like a team is being built or still being developed, but you have the minimum numbers to run a trip this year, and kind of what's that threshold balance look like?
Yeah, so I hopefully by the end of the summer, I know I have enough people to run the expedition and theoretically not lose so much money that my partners in Alpenglow get really angry at me. So by the end of summer, we have a plan. And then the fall is really when we're trying to book our staff. And this is one of those like funny balancing act juggling games, because it's really important to me that we have the absolute best mountain guides, Sherpa, and cooks available on the mountain. Those mountain guides, Sherpa, and cooks are really dedicated to Alpenglow, but at the same time, they cannot afford to miss a season. A season on Everest for many of the people who work there might be 70% of their income for the year and how they support their family. And because it is difficult and dangerous work for the very pinnacle of mountain guides and Sherpa and cooks in the world. It just is. And so they deserve to be well compensated. That means they plan their year around that compensation. And so the challenge is we need to give people enough, we need to lock that staff in as soon as we possibly can. But at the same time, we can't really guarantee the work until we have payments from our clients. And that's the balancing act that basically happens all fall and takes a huge amount of my time, is trying to keep open, transparent communication between, let's say we're talking to a dozen clients and we're talking to 30 to 40 staff members, and just trying to be fair to everyone and get things lined up. That's a huge part of what happens in the autumn.
And, obviously the staffers, like you mentioned, include Sherpa and cooks and guides. Obviously, the pairing of guides and clients is a little bit of an ongoing process. How does the communication with the Sherpa teams work in terms of identifying those numbers? Do you talk to every single Sherpa, or is there a lead Sherpa that you're communicating with and they're establishing the Sherpa team that they feel they need?
That part has really changed over the years thanks to social media. We all shit so much on social media, and I'm right there in the front sometimes of what I think it does on the negative side. But one of the beauties is it has truly connected our world to where now every single one of the Sherpa that I work with, I can have direct comms with, and stay in touch through the year and hear about family drama and be there to help if something's needed, and vice versa. And so even though we do have a team leader in Nepal, his name's Dorje Sonam Sherpa. He's been what we call a Sirdar, or head Sherpa, I've worked with him for 20 years and he's been our head for most of that time. He very much leads the team and makes job offers. But all of the individual Sherpa are also writing Logan and me and Topo and Kala, and kind of like staying in the mix and getting the vibe check and figuring out like, are there going to be enough clients? And I really appreciate that we have kind of both of that. We have a leader, but we also have these direct comms. And it's always, I think Alpenglow might be a little bit unique, but like we don't pay our Sherpa staff through like a local operator that might be skimming off the top, or paying lower wages or paying months late, things like that, just because business is hard in Nepal, just like it is everywhere. That's not saying that necessarily unethical things are happening. It's just business is hard and everyone's trying to survive. But we do all of our work with Sherpas direct. We pay to their bank accounts, things like that. And so those relationships, that open communication is really important.
And so in the fall, it's Sherpa numbers, it's client numbers. Is there any other big picture kind of logistical item that needs to be dialed in the fall, or at least established in the fall? Things that I can think of are equipment, oxygen, base camp luxuries, anything like that?
I mean, the big thing is like thinking about the philosophy of the team in those things that you mentioned, kind of equipment and things like that. So usually what happens is at the end of the season, we've had probably two big debriefs. One at the end of May or early June in person in like Chengdu. All the clients leave, the guides and staff stay for another 48 hours, and we just talk a load of shit about all the things that went right and all the things that went wrong and all the things we want to change. And we try to take really good notes. That happens then. And then we forget about it for a couple of months. The next thing that happens kind of in September is we regroup and kind of redo that debrief and figure out the priorities of what we're going to change for next year. And I think this is a big part of like maybe how Everest differs from, let's say, a Cotopaxi or an Aconcagua or all these other mountains that we run that are just like this trip. Everest is still wildly dangerous, in my opinion, in many ways, despite how safe we've made it, and or the industry has made it, and it's like we're still figuring out how to do it. And so what that means is big changes can and do happen year by year, and there is a lot of talk to talk about, and that's everything from, you mentioned luxuries, like the industry has been pushing towards more luxury. Like, should we move away from mountain tents you have to get on your knees to get into, but they can handle really big storms? Should we move away from those at base camp to big box tents that you can have a real mattress on a real bed, and you can have an electric blanket, and you can have a heater, and you can have a desk, and you can have a closet, and but they're terrible in storms, and they're really, really cold because they're much bigger spaces to heat kind of thing. And so that's one tiny example that we've been debating the last couple of years on the luxury side. But then there's like the philosophy side, right? Like oxygen delivery technology has continued to get better and better. And so we have constant discussions over months whether we want to increase our oxygen flow, or we're seeing more and more teams starting to use oxygen lower and lower and lower on the mountain. Do we want to be a part of that trend, or do we want to fight against that trend? Or the third big example that we talk about a lot is like we're seeing weather patterns really change in the Himalaya and actually around the world. You and I talk about this with skiing, how seasons in Japan might be changing or Europe might be changing. Well, the Himalaya season feels like it might be changing too. And so we're talking in the autumn about like, do we need to adjust our dates next year of when we're actually going to the mountain to maximize the opportunity to have a good summit success window? So all of that was sort of big picture to say, and I think you and I did an interview with Will Cockerell, who wrote a book called Everest Inc.
I believe it was episode 6 or 7.
Look at that. You're just dialed. That's how you're the pro. Like, if anyone is interested, like this industry of summiting, climbing Mount Everest safely with non-professional climbers, it is still so young. We're 25 years in. Before that, it was like professional climbers until the mid 90s. It was professional lifetime mountaineers on national teams. And since we're only bringing a few hundred people a year, and before 10 years ago, it was only dozens of people a year, like the sample size is actually so small. This isn't like a cruise ship. It's not like ski areas. It's not even rock climbing at Lover's Leap or Yosemite. Like, there's so little experience actually that we're still making really big changes year by year and having to make really big decisions. And that's a big part of why Everest is all encompassing.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's kind of the fall. And then you talked about the CTMA in mid-January is kind of your deadline. So the CTMA is the Chinese Tibet Mountaineering Association. They manage basically the invitation letters that allow a client to get a visa to visit China, as well as get access into Lhasa, where the trip basically begins, and on into the national park. What does that process look like?
Yeah, that's right. And if you want to talk about about Nepal, we can as well, since we guided from that side of the mountain for many, many years. But obviously, China is our focus now, and I'm wearing my Alpenglow shirt, so we're talking about it like Alpenglows way. But yeah, so things really heat up in January in terms of like logistics that have to get done. So the team's been fully formed. Everything's decided from the clients. We've gotten at least deposits from them. So now we can guarantee staff. And if someone bails, staff still get paid. That's really important to me because a Sherpa can't just switch teams. A guide can't just switch teams. So even if their client bails, we need to know we can pay that person. So that's why deposits are so important. The company might not get paid, but the person's going to get paid. So by January, we're kind of past that. We know exactly how many people are going and who they are and in what style they're climbing. Are they using no oxygen? Are they trying to go lightning ascend super fast? Are they on the group team or the private team? All those things. So now we can actually build the structure. Two big things that need to happen. One is kind of like equipment. We've made all the decisions about the philosophy of the trip and anything we're changing. Now we need to get, there's something somewhere in the vicinity. I should figure it out again. But let's say we're going to have like 24,000 pounds of equipment and food on trucks to base camp. So that stuff all needs to get from the UK where our doctor is, from the US where we are, from our stores in Nepal, and then we also store in Tibet. All of that stuff needs to get to one place, be checked, make sure it's clean, functioning, all that, ready for the season, and then shipped, and then get across the border and into Tibet and to base camp. So that's a big part. And a lot of that needs to happen really early because we'll ship cargo to Kathmandu and things like that. That's the easiest way to get things in, is actually sending it to a total another country, Nepal, and then bringing it with our Sherpa team when they cross the land border. But we still fly. Like I usually fly with 20, 70-pound duffel bags. So what's that? 1,400 pounds of gear will actually go with me on a commercial flight to a capital city in China and then eventually to Tibet. It's not a lot of fun.
Hence the Duffel Shuffle.
Duffel Shuffle. That's exactly where this name came from. It's like every time we ask our guests about their Duffel Shuffle stories, I'm like, let me tell a few. It has been wild when you're moving 20 duffel bags, occasionally alone. Now, generally, I get to fly with other guys and with our base camp manager, Emily, and things have gotten a lot easier. But like my best Duffel Shuffle stories are definitely when I'm moving 20 plus duffel bags through whatever city we land in China first before we can fly onwards. And China is still a country where you have to recheck your bags, kind of like the US. When you land in the US, you have to move your bags. So I've ended up alone with 20 plus duffel bags on 7 different baggage carts and had to move them between terminals. And it's like you push one cart 50 feet, then you run back and get the second one. And
save your story for the end. Save your story for the end.
It's already done. That's it. So, okay. So that's gear. But then the other big piece that is actually what you asked about is kind of like permits. And specifically in China, permissions are really difficult. Tibet is still this extraordinarily sensitive part of China. Obviously, it was an independent country. It's now claimed by China. It's still disputed. It's incredibly important to China. And they want to be really careful of who's allowed in. At the same time, they're building a massive tourist industry in Tibet because it does have some of the wildest, most beautiful things in the world, Mount Everest, the Himalaya. It's also got this incredibly interesting culture that is still alive there of Tibetan Buddhism in monasteries throughout Tibet. And so for us to get in, we essentially need 2 different permissions. We need visas for China that we're allowed to travel to China, mainland China, and then we need Tibet travel permits. And then finally, we need expedition permits. And that process we've worked through in many different ways over the past 15 years. We now have a system that we like quite a bit. Each individual applies for their own Chinese visa as if they're just traveling to China normally. Like you wanted to go for a weekend to see the pandas in Chengdu, or you wanted to go to Beijing or somewhere like that. Because China's gotten a lot more friendly, especially to Americans, believe it or not, American tourism is really being encouraged in China. So it's now quite easy for Americans to get 10-year multi-entry visas. The process still takes a few weeks and costs a few $100s. It's not super easy to just, like, you can't just show up. You have to get the visa in your passport in advance, and it takes time. So we work through that process with our clients. Very, very occasionally, because of someone's job or online presence, China will want to know more about one of our clients or guides. But it used to be quite common. It's now very, very rare. But we do want to give people time to do that. So they usually get their visas in January to give us a couple of months if anything pops up. And then the CTMA, the Chinese Tibetan Mountaineering Association, are the ones who will give us both our expedition permits for the mountain and our Tibet travel permits. And they will be responsible for us moving through Tibet. So anytime we're not on the mountain, we have kind of a handler from the CTMA, and they're awesome and so much fun and love having us there and showing us this incredible part of their country. But they have a lot of responsibility to make sure we are responsible while traveling there. And so that is the longer part of the process. And it's a little bit of a black box, honestly, still today. And I've been doing it for, multiple mountains in Tibet for more than a decade now. And it's pretty difficult. No one's sending you an official checklist. Do this, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. That is not how this works. It's mostly WeChat, the Chinese equivalent of WhatsApp, getting vague and opaque updates of what is happening. So while we don't know what they're doing, they very much want to know what we're doing. And our deadlines are non-negotiable. It's like, have money in this account by this date, have these names and these passport scans, and these bio data forms and these summit certificates and these medical forms from your doctor. Like, there is a huge amount of paperwork for every single person, and small mistakes are not really acceptable, and neither are changes. So one of our greatest challenges, I'll throw Chad Peel, one of our best mountain guides, under the bus. He sends us in his passport, he's ready to rock and roll, and we do all these weeks and weeks and weeks of work. And then it turns out he doesn't have 2 blank pages left in his passport side by side. It's a 2-page visa from China. He had 2 pages left, but they weren't side by side because he's guiding so much all over the world for Alpenglow expeditions. Doesn't notice that, all of a sudden needs a new passport. But a new passport in the US means a new passport number, which the CTMA won't accept because you've already been approved with another number. And so that's an example of something that throws off the whole system and almost feels like it jeopardizes the permit for everyone. It always works out, but Logan and I might not get a lot of sleep while we're going through those processes.
So is Chad good to go this year?
Chad has a 10-year visa now, and we're just hoping he doesn't mess anything up.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, the CTMA process is always interesting. I think you said it very well. Like, you don't know what's going on for them, but they know exactly what's going on for you at all times. And so the uncertainty and it's hard to sell, it always works out.
Right.
Even though it does. And so that's a major factor.
Yeah, it really does. The one client that I just mentioned last year who didn't get approved was a truly, I can't share the story here, but was a truly, truly unique situation that it made a lot of sense why the approval didn't come. And so coming out of this podcast, I want people to have confidence in China, of course, because it's important to my business, but it's also true. We haven't had a denial in years and years and years until this most recent one. And second of all, the CTMA have become our friends and our partners in making this work. And the frustrations that we feel, I think they often feel as well. It in no way feels like we're banging up against and competing with someone. It's just a hard process to go to Tibet. We know lots of people have been denied traveling to Tibet, even in the past few years. And I really want it to continue to be available for international climbers. It is one of the most incredible playgrounds on the planet, obviously. And when we go, we get to bring money into these local communities that are really trying to grow, really trying to understand international tourism, are really trying to meet international tourism standards, things like ethics and sustainability. And I want us and I want our clients to be able to support that. And so there is a little bit of we need to play this game. We need to understand that it is complicated.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that the barriers that are being created are the Chinese government, not the CTMA. And the Chinese government, as far as revenue goes, mountaineering on Mount Everest and in Tibet is a very, very small, tiny line item that probably barely shows up. And so the incentive for them to make it easier is not necessarily a financial incentive. And that's likely the result of, why it's as difficult as it can be.
Yeah, I think it's a great point and an important point. It's not that China doesn't want climbers or doesn't like climbing or doesn't, think international people should go to Tibet, but it is this tiny, tiny piece of revenue where they're focusing on so many other things. And you see it, and they're actively building I think a million or millions of Chinese tourists will visit Mount Everest National Park this year.
Mm-hmm.
They're building infrastructure for that. And it's amazing, right? It's like Americans visiting the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone or Yosemite. And they're trying to figure out how to have that kind of visitation and to be able to share this incredible place while also keeping it sustainable as they look to things in Nepal. Like, I think it's really easy from the outside to be like, Nepal's doing it right and China's doing it wrong. Like, my opinion is that China is a lot further forward in how to make tourism sustainable in a national park and keep it pristine and wild. And that doesn't mean that it's perfect. It doesn't mean I don't get frustrated. It doesn't mean it's fair, but they very much recognize that this place needs to be maintained.
Oh, that's cool. Cool to hear.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference.
So, beyond the CTMA, you talked a little bit about equipment coming from all parts of the world. Obviously there's the big stuff like tents and base camp luxuries, the infrastructure support like generators, satellite Wi-Fi, propane heaters, propane tanks. Equipment is coming from everywhere. You mentioned that Alpenglow has storage in Tibet, in Kathmandu. There's obviously equipment that comes from the US. There's medical supplies that come from Europe. What is that whole
chocolate and coffee that come from Ecuador?
Yeah, there you go. Chocolate and coffee that come from Ecuador. Very important. Do you put those in the necessary items or the base camp luxuries?
Yeah, those are essentials.
What does the process of managing that equipment look like? I know these expeditions don't leave with new gear and come back with still all functioning equipment. So there's the replacing damaged items or repairing damaged items process. There's just the general inventory. There's ensuring that everything is, sufficient, but also just moving of all this equipment. Talk a little bit about that aspect of an Everest expedition.
Yeah. And this is a big part that Logan, who I mention a lot, my business partner in Alpenglow Expedition, who's also an IFMGA mountain guide, but is just an incredible, I'd say, logistics, maven and really likes the details. He's helped Alpenglow professionalize so much. I'd say when I was running these trips, it was a lot of back of the napkin. It's my favorite phrase in the world, right? And all in my head. And it's okay, we got this many classes. Let's bring 80 tents. It'll probably work out. And now we have a lot more philosophy behind it or math behind it. There's spreadsheets to figure out this many members, this many sherpa, this is how many oxygen bottles we need, this is how many backups we need, and coming back with, I would back in the day just be I bet we destroyed, 5 sleeping bags, 10 stoves, and 15 tents. Or I remember that one storm where 20 tents got destroyed with everything inside them. Let's replace that. Now, that's all tracked, right? It's the guide's job at the end of the season to very clearly write down everything that was destroyed or lost. And then Dorje Sonama Serdar, he's basically got a full-time job with Everest. It's not a seasonal job. He lives in Kathmandu for a big part of the year and, goes to the store 6 months in advance, goes to the store again 3 months in advance, goes through everything, sets up every single one of Alpenglow's 71 tents. I know that's how many we have right now. And figures out how many need new poles, how many need this, things like that. So kind of doubling, backing up what the guide said happened. And then we have the same thing with a Tibetan named Zangmu, where we keep everything in Tingri and he goes through it all. And the beauty of social media and technology and all this, he can send photos now of broken things or things that mice ate or whatever animals ate through, this and that and destroyed and stuff like that. So there's a lot of back and forth happening, but Logan has really professionalized a lot that now I can just jump into like a Google Doc and actually, see this ongoing process and see where the math came from for what we're actually bringing or sending. Then we reach out to our partners and see how our partners like Black Diamond or, MSR and people like that can support us or want to help to have their brands on the mountain. And so we figure out, how much is being donated or what price, how much we're purchasing. And then the goal is to get everything in time that we can get it out to embroiderers and silk screeners to get the logo on it and then get it back in time for the shipment.
Wild.
It's like you said, that pod is no different than another trip. It's just on a bigger scale. The other big part of the scale that I think people often don't realize, that when I say 20,000 pounds of gear, even to me, it sounds insane, right? Like when I think about it, I'm like, do we really need 71 tents on the mountain, not counting base camp and ABC? Like that's the upper mountain. But the big thing is when the weather goes bad or we have a huge storm on a mountain like Cotopaxi, and we just keep picking on Cotopaxi because it's the most commonly mountain we run in Ecuador. We do week-long trips there. The trips cost, let's say, $3,000, $4,000. You go down, you do your best. Or if you're going to Mount Shasta or Mount Rainier, like people fail on those mountains all the time for a huge variety of reasons. And a lot of those reasons could be things like weather or a big storm wipes out your camp. And you say, wow, that was a wild adventure. We got the shit kicked out of us. And you go home and you think about coming back the next year. Everest is different. It's financially different. It's time different. We're trying to build a system so that every client who has the physical and mental ability to make a summit push gets an opportunity to have that summit push. And that means that, like, I've had a storm wipe out 26 tents with every single thing inside of them. So Camp 2, Camp 3, Camp 4, all wiped out. Everything gone. This is back in the day when weather forecasting wasn't quite as good as it was today. We've learned a lot to try to avoid those situations now. But 26 tents gone off the mountain and a month of work of putting all those tents and camps in. And we still wanted to stay, reset, and give people the opportunity to summit. And 2/3 of our team ended up summiting that season. We added days to the trip. Guides had to cancel weddings and climbing trips and everything else to stay and do that. And that's the mindset we bring into Everest, is like, no matter how bad it goes, how can we still give people, if we can safely, an opportunity to summit this mountain that they've poured years of their lives into? And that takes massive infrastructure and planning.
Is there a like reserves percentage? Like, let's say you have, how many tents you're going to plan to use. Does that create a number of how many tents you're going to bring extra? Or is it more just like, we want to make sure that we have, extras of everything just in case?
No, that's exactly what we do, is reserves of everything. And a good company should. Now, there are companies out there that do exactly the opposite, right? They bring 20% less oxygen than they need, let's say, because they plan on a bunch of their clients being too weak to summit, and then they have enough oxygen for the ones that are left. So our philosophy is not everyone's philosophy, but yeah, we're planning reserves, but it's really expensive. So our reserves for oxygen specifically are about 20 to 25%. Most of that's just going to be wasted. You bring it for the season, you carry it, you spend tens of thousands of dollars to ship it and move it and do all these things, and then it comes back down and it's gone. Like it's not good for the next season. We refill the bottles, we start again. Like everything needs cleaned and fixed and all these things. So those are kind of the back end things that a lot of people don't see. And oxygen is one really easy example, but medical is the same thing. Every year, everything expires. And so we spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on medical supplies, and hopefully most of them don't get used, and then they get replaced the following year. Tents, is a little bit more of an odd. We're trying to figure out like how big a storm might happen, and then like how many more do we need to be able to reset the mountain. That might totally change. Like right now, when we go up and climb on the mountain, it's 2 people inside a 4-person tent kind of thing, and it's really comfortable. You got room for your down suits and your organization and all this. Well, after a storm that you lose 26 tents.
It's six people in a 4-person tent.
Yeah, exactly. Because there just isn't the human power to bring it all back up. You got to refix the ropes. You got to break the trail. You got to carry all the tents, and you still have limited time. It took a month to set the mountain up once. Now you got to do it all over again in 5 days. So yeah, it might be 6 people in a tent. It might be with 2 sleeping bags just laying over on top of everyone, but there's still got to be the resources there.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot of debate between like Topo, my co-expedition leader, Logan, who's at home and a little more like unemotional to the whole thing, Monica, who's just seen so many accidents and incidents over the year, and then me, and we kind of like try to thread the needle. And it's like everything. It's like how much avalanche, like backup rescue gear you bring on a day skiing, right? Like nothing happens for months and months, and you get lighter and lighter and lighter, and bring less bivy gear and repair kit and all these things, big down jacket. Then you get the shit kicked out of you, or have an incident, or spend a night out, and all of a sudden you're way over here on this side, and then you slowly wind back, right? Like, so we're probably in that slowly winding back stage. Like, we haven't had a huge storm where we've lost 20 something tents in a couple of years. We haven't had a massive oxygen failure of our entire system from a manufacturing defect in years. So like, we're slowly like carrying less and less. And so, quite aware of that line. And like, we might be getting pushed back to the heavy again.
So, one thing you hear in the media is a lot about these base camps are like becoming more and more luxurious. You talked about the debate of having, big box tents versus small little mountaineering tents. How much of this equipment that we're talking about is base camp and advanced base camp specific? And how much of it do you think is like on mountain?
That's a great question. I mean, a lot of it is base camp and ABC specific. So specifically on the Chinese side, we can drive to base camp. So there's essentially no limit to the comforts we can bring to base camp. And like, I love it. I love bringing like a $10,000 Italian espresso machine and barista to base camp. Like, because we can, and it surprises people, and it's not environmentally bad to do that, and it's employing another person. Like a full-time Nepali barista is now part of our team, right? How cool is that? And like, Tibetans are learning how to make flat whites, and maybe one day they're going to start their own little coffee businesses in Lhasa and Shigatse and Tingri.
I love this justification.
Totally justifying my coffee needs. But so base camp, like we have hydroelectric power. So every single sleeping tent has full-time 24-hour power. We were the first people, and I just love this because I sleep really cold. We have electric blankets. So like we don't have to heat the whole box tent because that seems a little ridiculous, but like we got an electric blanket, and I turn mine on an hour before I go to bed, and it's just amazing. And so like, yeah, creature comforts to base camp, we go pretty deep, and it's a lot of stuff. One of the challenges there is like, can the Sherpa and Tibetan team get into base camp enough days in advance to build a lot of our luxury? Last year, we backed off quite a bit because the Sherpa entered Tibet the same day as the clients because of the challenge with China reopening Tibet for the first time since COVID. And so, I'm not afraid as a company owner to be like, guys, like, no electric blankets this year. We can't get the hydro built in time.
But the barista and the espresso machine are coming.
Or like, instead of 2 dome tents, or huge dome tents, like we call them white pods with big windows, 23-foot tall ceilings. Usually we have one just for games, like a pool table and a foosball table and a training center for Topo because he needs a place to be able to like hangboard and do like Pilates and stuff. It's like, so usually we have one for that and one for dining and eating and coffee and all that. It's like, okay, well, this season we're only going to have one, and everyone's going to be fine. So I think we don't lose the plot. The plot is not the luxury. That doesn't differentiate a company, and it doesn't make a good or bad mountaineering expedition. Do I love surprising people with like sizzling skillets that they're having their yak steaks on and a pizza oven? Of course I do. But is it necessary to a good expedition? No. That's base camp. ABC, we carry everything by yak. It's 2 days on a yak. It's incredibly expensive, actually. And like you can't kind of fathom how expensive it is. I think a single yak load is like $600 round trip. And in the spring, they're only allowed to carry 50 kg or 110 pounds because they're so skinny from living outside on the Twin Plateau at 16,000 feet all winter. They're really weak. And so we're just not allowed to load them more. So it's super expensive to bring things to ABC. And you're getting ABC's at 21,000 feet. I want people to be comfortable there. I want them to have a few surprises, but we're in a super delicate alpine environment where there's a lot of like risk of kind of overdoing it or screwing up. Like I hate generators. We don't bring generators. We do everything with solar. Does that limit how comfortable our camp can be? Sure, but do I want my clients listening to Jennies all night long? And like, do I want to overload yaks or like force yaks? Like I need all my loads of luxury, and that means another team who's less connected than me can't even get their mountaineering equipment up to that camp. Like, so we start to have a bit of a balance at ABC.
So does the espresso machine go to ABC?
It does not.
All
no.
right. That answered my question just in that one response.
We're down to pour overs. We still have good coffee. I have a hand presso. It's where I met Emily Harrington. Everyone's heard this story if you listen to this podcast, but like handheld espresso machine, but no power. Super simple, but still great food, healthy food. The things that I actually think make a difference to clients being successful. Heat is actually still important to me up there, but not in their tents anymore. They come to the group tent to have heat.
Solo tents at ABC or group tents?
Solo tents, but they're mountaineering tents. And this is, I will die on this hill, I think. Like we're starting to see requests for big tents, but it is 21,000 feet. And over my 8 years there, probably 5 of those years, I've seen 120 mile per hour winds come through and just shred all the big tents, the dining tents, all of these things. The only things that survive are like sling fin domes that are made for 100 mile an hour winds, and true mountaineering tents like Black Diamond tents. And so what happens is Sherpa and guides end up having to do really backbreaking work to save big tents. And members have terrible nights of sleep as they're being moved from big tent to big tent as things get shredded, all these things. So to me, we're in the mountains once we're at 21,000 feet. It's taller than any point in the United States, like taller than the summit of Denali. Like, let's be mountaineers once we're there with some comforts, but let's be mountaineers. And then above that, we're in full mountain systems. We're cooking on MSR reactor stoves. We're eating simple dehy food or food that's been pre-cooked in the kitchen at ABC and carried up. And we're in real mountaineering tents. There's 3 camps up there. Very little of the weight we're talking about is actually moving on the mountain. It's all being carried by Sherpa and team members, but especially Sherpa. And so, we want those loads to be minimal. We want safety. We want, success. But we want minimal amounts of stuff up there because when stuff gets left, it's usually because Sherpa have been overloaded, they're exhausted, and then something happens on the mountain like a rescue, and all of a sudden gear's not coming back down off the mountain. And that's what we want to avoid. So we there's still a lot of equipment and things for the upper mountain, all those backups we were talking about, but we're trying to really limit what's brought up to ensure that every single thing comes back down.
Yep, absolutely. The removal of this stuff is a factor that I think a lot of people don't consider, right? It's like all about how does it get there, but you got to factor in how does it get back.
Yeah, it's so true. And China's made an interesting decision. It used to be in China, and it still currently is in Nepal, that you can stash gear at places like ABC, or in Nepal, people stash gear at Camp 2 at 20,000 feet, essentially equivalent to our ABC, but it's above the ice fall. People stash thousands of pounds of tents and cooking things and tables and solar. And, I've seen it on both sides of the mountain. Companies change and equipment changes. And so new stuff gets brought up, and old stuff that was stashed to use next year just starts building up and building up and building up. So China made a decision a few years ago, no more stashing. They charged all the teams to bring thousands and thousands of pounds of shit down that had been stashed. And does it make our jobs harder? Yes. Does it make the trip more expensive for our clients? Absolutely. But I stand behind it. It's the same thing. I just love my soapbox. It's like people at rock climbing in the United States are now stashing things like ropes at the base of cliffs that are so far to hike to. They're like 40 minutes, some are 20 minutes, some are an hour. Pads, bouldering pads. We started to see a lot of this in national parks, stashing bouldering pads because you need so many bouldering pads to climb these difficult boulders. And so they're getting stashed. Like, My opinion, it's bullshit because the risk of things going from being stashed to trash is too great. And if you multiply it out, if everybody does it,
Mm-hmm.
like these places are meant to be pristine. We should bring everything up that we need and bring it down. And if it's too heavy or too expensive to bring it up and back down, then we don't need it. We shouldn't bring it.
Absolutely.
Like it just, I know. And saying that to you, you're like, obviously, like leave no trace. Like it's so obvious. But when you get to these big mountains and when you're talking about thousands of pounds instead of hundreds of pounds, and you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars to move things instead of, you know, whatever, less expensive solutions, it gets murky. And I don't want it to be murky.
Well, and I think regardless of where you are, it's a slippery slope, and it's really easy to think, oh, I'm going to be back here tomorrow morning and I'll stash it. And then it's like, well, I'm going to be back here in a few days. I'll just stash it. And then all of a sudden it's like you're stashing it for seasons or
Exactly.
it gets lost. So
there's my hot take.
There you go.
Stash. Don't stash at climbing crags. Don't stash on big mountains.
I like it.
Stash is trash. There we go.
Yep. Coined. So shifting gears a little bit, I think a big factor in all this preparation is the pairings of guides with climbers and Sherpa. How does that process work its way out? And do you identify the pairings of clients and guides and Sherpa all at once, or do the client and guide relationships get established first and then the Sherpas happen on the mountain?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So pairing guides with members is like it's a true deep partnership that's happening. And again, this is where Everest differs from a lot of mountains. Like, of course, in every mountain, a client guide relationship should be a partnership as well as like a paying kind of relationship. On Everest, that is so much more true because the risks are so much greater. And those risks do affect guides as well as clients, whether it's a twisted ankle at 28,000 feet or it's like a sickness or altitude issue that means schedules are going to change. It happens. I have had just as many guides shipped off of Mount Everest for medical emergencies as I have clients, right? Like percentage wise, it's not unequal, it's equal. And I think that's right because I want everyone working to their limit. So I want the client working to their limit and the guide and the Sherpa working to their limit. And those limits might be different, but it means there will be effects to everyone potentially. Just last year, we had a guide, Sid, one of our just fantastic Everest guides, and he had a dental emergency. I think he knew he had a problem with a tooth and life was too busy. Heli skiing was too good before the season. This is where you get like, that's the part that's not okay, right? But like, anyway, the dental emergency that was an emergency before became a total emergency at altitude. And like, he just had to leave the mountain for a few days. And like, he had to go to like a dentist in rural Tibet and get a tooth pulled without anesthetic. So like everyone had pain and suffering in this process, but it meant all of a sudden, like he was on a private and that client, that member was, not able to be guided by their guide for a few days and then another week or 2 weeks of like recovery because it was like not a great scenario. And so all that to say, I want those people to be deeply tied, those partnerships to be really formed before they come to the mountain. So best case scenario, our clients have climbed with their guides on other mountains before they ever get to Everest. And that's true with probably 70% or more of our Everest clients on an average year, and certainly this year. And if not, it's multiple Zoom calls. It's getting to know each other. It's talking to other guides that have climbed with the climber and kind of like just trying to get as deep as you can. We don't do that with our Sherpa team. And I think it's a little bit of Alpenglow's philosophy. Like, we really, again, want that like mountain guide partnership to be very strong. And your climbing partner is your mountain guide, whether you're on the group trip or the private trip. And our Sherpa generally climb as a team of Sherpa. They get to have a lot of fun. They work really hard. What they do is so impressive. And they're stalking the mountain, helping to fix rope, which is actually done by the Tibetans, but our Sherpa will often help re-breaking trail after storms, setting camps, all these things. For most of the season, our Sherpa are not climbing with our members. They're out there like establishing the mountain and available as a safety net to our guide client teams if there's an issue, if there's an incident, or if just someone's having a bad day and we need some help. They don't, so the Sherpa don't join into kind of like the partnership until summit push. So by that point, the nice thing is, even though they're working these different teams on the mountain, we're all hanging out together in base camp, ABC, and especially North Col Camp, where a lot of stuff happens from. And so members have started to develop relationships with Sherpa that they connect with, that maybe they move at a similar pace as, or they share something like having kids, not having kids, loving volleyball, loving F1, whatever it might be. There's a lot of encouraging that, like, kind of like relationship building in our camps, so that before summit push, we make our decisions, who's climbing with who's connected, kind of formalize that relationship, and then they're on the summit push together.
Well, I think it highlights too that the client-guide relationship is truly every day of the trip. There's this, bond being created. It's not just a client-guide relationship on summit day. And that Sherpa relationship is a little bit more of that, like, they're working for the whole team, the benefit of the whole team throughout the process. And that relationship gets established on that summit day. So that's kind of the differentiating factor there.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I hate to wrap this up, but I do really want to hear your true best Duffel Shuffle story.
Keeping it tight, Sam. I mean, shoot, I have so many, and I didn't expect to be asked this today. You didn't prepare me. It's like, is it, losing 2 duffel bags on a yak off the side of a cliff in Nepal? It was really brutal, and like having to get those bags
duffel bags or the yak.
We lost the yak. I mean, yeah, I'm guessing I'm going to be guest on this podcast multiple times. So let's do that one, and there'll be time for more. So this is in the Khumbu Valley, early in my career. I don't speak much Nepali, as you probably guessed. And we were going to Amada Blam. So we probably had, I don't know, 15 yaks carrying 30 duffel bags of equipment at that time. And the trails back in like the late 90s, early 2000s look nothing like today. They had now they'll actually have like railings in the really dangerous parts, and the bridges aren't made of wood and rope anymore. They're made of steel. It has changed a lot. It's still wild, but it's changed a lot. But back then, these trails were rough, and you had to be really careful when yaks and people were passing, not to be on the outside of a turn, because a yak would just push tourists off trails and things like that. Like, it was not an uncommon scenario. And unfortunately, we had 2 yak trains passing each other, and one of our yaks got too close to the edge and had a bit of a collapse. I didn't see it happen. I was 15 minutes behind on the trail. Some of our Sherpas saw it happen, and a yak fell off the trail with 2 of our duffel bags. But he fell like 600 feet down a vertical cliff to mud to jungle to river. There were 2 horrible parts about this. One is the yak. In Nepal, especially 25 years ago in the Khumbu, the yaks are the store of wealth for wealthy families there. Mm-hmm. Yaks and tea houses. Those are the 2 stores of wealth. And so yaks were actually insured. I didn't know any of this. But as the expedition leader, one of the first things I was told, I was trying to figure out what was going to happen to the bags. Like, it was 2 climb bags. It was all of their equipment, their boots, their down suits, everything they needed to climb Mount Blanc, ice axes, all of it. So we were trying to figure out, could we get the bags back? And then I get told by my Sherpa team, like, actually, Adrian, we need you to go down and verify for the insurance policy that the yak is dead, and it has to be the expedition leader. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, wow. The yak is clearly dead. And they're like, no. Like, need to go down and take a photo. And like, okay. So we ended up figuring out with the local people from this village the way that you can get down to the river and then move along the river to get to the yak. And then the way they verify the yak is dead is you have to scrape the eyeball. And like, if the yak was still alive, the yak would react. So I had to like scrape the eyeball, and then I had to sign this like 12-page document that was all written in Hindi, Nepali. Like, I couldn't understand any of it, and I had to sign in all these places. Apparently it said the yak was dead, so they could get the $400, which is a huge amount of money, more than double the annual salary of a Nepali at that time. They could get the $400 insurance policy. And then we had to come up with a plan to get these like duffel bags back up this like wild ravine trail, all of this. So that was an early Duffel Shuffle story.
That's a fantastic one. Interesting. Wow.
And you got to learn about yak insurance.
Exactly. And so is the death of the yak culturally, is it mostly about the wealth and the insurance, or is it also like, are they impacted emotionally losing a yak?
Totally, as I understand it, again, I've spent decades in Nepal, but I still recognize that like it's hard to learn a different culture. But as I saw it and understood it, especially Tibetan Buddhist Sherpa people, and that's who owned this yak, they're incredibly pragmatic about death, right? Like when a human dies, provided everything is done well, that soul reincarnates hopefully in a better place. They are so pragmatic about death. And it certainly seemed that way with the yak as well. The other part is that Tibetan Buddhists don't kill, so they don't kill animals, but they are not vegetarians.
Yeah.
And when a yak falls off the trail, and I'm like putting in air quotes because it seems like yaks fall off trails more than maybe yaks fall off trails. This one definitely fell off the trail, but there always seems to be a yak falling off the trail just when there's no meat left in the town. And so like all of that meat was used. Everything from that yak was sort of repurposed. And
did you have it before Summit Push or
yak
after?
steaks 2 days later? This was all before Summit Push, but we definitely had yak steaks. And again, pragmatic. Like the cook was like, "This is the yak that fell off the trail 2 days ago." Like it wasn't like a horrible thing. It was like, let's eat.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So you're off to Everest in 6-7 weeks. What's the first thing you're throwing in your duffel bag this year?
The truth is my Kindle, but that's what all of our guests say.
Okay, I'm going to spin it. Is there any new equipment, since you have a new sponsor in Black Diamond, is there any new equipment that you're really excited to bring that's either available to the public or that you're testing out for a future product?
Yeah, that's easy. I mean, there's a lot of new things coming out, and it's an exciting time at Black Diamond. But clearly the most fun is for the last 2 years, Carla Perez, Topo Esteban Mena, and me, I have been working on a Black Diamond down suit. So the most essential piece of gear that keeps us alive to the tallest place in the world, that we also want to be non-Michelin man, athletic, and actually work in the real environment, not just like on the mannequin in the store. And there's been a holy grail around down suits forever of like how to be warm enough and protective enough for like the worst day, and yet also be transformational enough to wear and climb hard on all the normal days. And I think we're there, and we have like the 4th prototype coming out next month, and we're bringing it, and I cannot wait to climb in it.
Awesome. Well, I hope your client is as confident as you are in your prototype down suit.
Holy grail. No one wants, when you hear it's like, it's the holy grail, it's like, well, that's definitely not going to work.
Yeah, exactly. The unicorn down suit. Awesome.
Right.
Well, thanks for your time, for your expertise in this subject matter. It's really fascinating to hear, and lots more Everest talk coming up on the Duffel Shuffle podcast.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks for listening to the Duffel Shuffle podcast. You can follow along on Instagram, where we post our favorite clips from each episode, as well as more about the world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. If you haven't already, please subscribe, rate us, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Catch you next time, and until then, we hope you enjoy some time outside.